Good morning or evening or afternoon, everyone. I know we have a global audience for this webinar. It's morning for me. See the sun shining in Seattle for once. Want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Safer Gambling in Elite Sports. I'm going to let everyone involved introduce themselves, starting with Mark Hicks. Mark, why don't you give everyone a greeting here?
Thanks, Mike. Mark Hicks. I'm with the NCAA. I've been here for about 18 years in a variety of different capacities and working in the sports betting landscape here for the last several years. So thank you.
Martin, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
It will be my pleasure. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody, wherever you may be. Thanks for having me, and it's great to have all of you. My name is Martin Lycka. I'm SVP for American Regulatory Affairs and Responsible Gambling, a very long-winded job title, at Entain, and I also happen to chair the board of the Entain Foundation US, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about the foundation. It's great to be here.
All right, Ryan, you're up, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. My name is Ryan Tatusko. I am a lived experience facilitator with Epic Global Solutions, former professional baseball player, and have current in recovery from gambling addiction for the last 2.5 years. So thank you very much for having me on.
You bet. And I, of course, forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mike Seeley, Associate Editor at Sports Handle and US Bets. I'm going to do the questioning here. And at the end of this webinar, if there's enough time, we'll have a little Q&A. You can enter your questions in the Q&A box here. I hope it's working. But I'll get rolling right now. Kind of round robin style here, guys. I'll ask a question, then whoever wants to answer can go ahead and do that. So first off, what approaches do each of your organizations take to educate athletes on gambling-related harms, and which approaches appear to be the most effective?
Yeah, I can start off. There's a lot of diverse efforts in educating student athletes at the NCAA, and so there's as we'll talk this afternoon about that, but there's 500,000 student athletes. There's like 1,100 plus member schools, so it takes a lot of different resources. So things at the national office that we generate, things that are done at the local level. So efforts by schools themselves and in conferences, a lot of different vendors and support folks in a variety of different capacities. One of the ways at the national office that we help educate is we partner with Epic, and Ryan and Martin will talk a lot about that. But really, a big part of that is bringing as much as we can lived experience to our institutions in partner with the Entain Foundation.
Right on.
Go ahead, Martin. I can go last.
Absolutely. So as Mark suggested, there's no one size fits all solution, no silver bullet. So what I would say, because Ryan's far closer to the lived experience method that Epic has so efficiently and gloriously deployed, not only throughout NCAA colleges, but also professional sports. Education of vulnerable groups is, at the risk of stating the obvious, critically important. And it's not just athletes, because it's minors, it's military personnel, and there are others. But of course, we're here today to talk about athletes. And as I've said, I would hate to be stealing Ryan's thunder, but I suppose it's fair to say that all athletes are characterized by their competitive streak. They just hate losing. And unfortunately, that may mean that if they do choose to engage with gambling, that competitive streak may come to the forefront. And that is the key reason why we need to do collectively, both as an industry and the sports governing bodies, everything in our power to protect the athletes, because that also ultimately helps. And I'm sure we'll come on to discussing the rather unfortunate recent scandals that have befallen sports betting. we need to do all this also to protect the integrity of the game and to make it circular and come back to athletes and staff and everybody else involved, the well-being of the whole communities. What I'm really trying to say is that it's all intertwined, and whichever way we do it, we must make sure that it's done very efficiently while reflecting all the applicable sensitivities here.
Thanks, Martin. Ryan, batter up.
Absolutely. For us, I think what's been most effective is, using that lived experience, right? And obviously, when we're talking with NCAA athletes, we want them to be educated, and understand what makes them more at risk than, like Martin said, than the average person, and walking them through that process of, this may be something that when you leave a university or you leave what you're doing, that you're not setting out to kind of cause yourself harm, but there are some things that are there that are inherent with, student athletes that may not be there. And ultimately too, when they leave their NCAA member institution, or maybe, they're within the professional sports ranks as well, that they have to make an informed decision on themselves of what their relationship looks like with wagering. And if it starts to become something that, becomes detrimental to what they're doing in terms of sport, in terms of what they're doing for their life, then maybe it's time to have a conversation with somebody. It's time to take, a step back, but really having that self, realization of, number one, what are the risk factors that are there, that are within us? What are the things that kind of make us tick, as Martin said, that can potentially make us, problematic gamblers? And being able for myself and my colleagues to go talk to those, at-risk populations to say, I was there where you sat. I was right there listening to people going, this is never going to happen to me. And now I'm on the opposite side going, this happened to me. And when I look back on it, there were so many baby steps that I took that by the time I reached out for help, I didn't even understand the distance that I traveled. And so we can better help now identify those things and potentially help you get to a point, or get help before you get to a point of where I was.
Thanks, Ryan. I know from how frequently my friend Pat Chester from Epic here in Seattle travels, that the education around sports betting has spread as fast as sports betting. What are the risks to organizations if they don't educate around this issue? And we'll start with Mark here again.
Yeah, we put things in two buckets, or at least I do. I think in terms of both welfare of people, student athlete welfare, and then also the integrity piece. And so, we really absolutely at the forefront of all this is put the people who play the game, and so the risk there, to not necessarily to our organization, but to those people, is just paramount for us to find ways to reach them, and again, raise awareness to what could happen. As Martin said, like very competitive people, like just at least providing an understanding of what can be involved in what has become very normalized in legalized sports betting, right? So, and then on the other side, the other risk is making people aware of the integrity concerns, and those go hand in hand. I do kind of think they're separate issues, but they very much dovetail amongst each other. So that's, I think, from our lens, how we view kind of the greatest risk to our organizations around and the need for educating.
Sure. Martin.
Let me pick it up, if I may, where Mark left it off, and provide you with an operator's perspective for obvious reasons. Sports betting indeed is a reality in the United States these days, has been for nearly 6 years. We're edging ever closer to the 6th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision to repeal PASPA, right? The risk of stating the obvious, the act that prohibited all forms of sports betting in this country. At the same time, let's not fool ourselves into believing that that would have meant that there was no sports betting happening. Unfortunately, there was. There was illegal sports betting, the proverbial bookie, shady dodgy bookie somewhere down your road, in the pub, wherever you might meet them. So really the first point I'm trying to make is that in my book, having regulation is the starting point, and it's a very good thing because it helps us detect the issues that we've been lately facing, including on the problem gambling side of things. And it's helped us create this environment, this ecosystem, to your point, Mike, whereby a lot of organizations have heavily invested into either providing, but also let me put emphasis on the second point, which is receiving problem and responsible gambling related education. Yes, it's a two-way traffic, and that's why the Entain Foundation US is so proud to be supporting EPIC's effort, EPIC as a partner to NCAA and their education program. And we've been doing it, or had the privilege and pleasure of doing it with professional sports as well. But let me just put it out there. Now, when we approach these organizations for the first time, it wasn't as though we'd been knocking on an open door, because originally, and I'm deliberately not naming any names, it was just a trend. 5-6 years ago, everybody was thinking, oh, cool, sports betting's been regulated. There's an expectation that a lot of states will have regulated it, and we'll just try to make the most of it. So only gradually and progressively, a lot of folks out there realized the risks that are associated with sports betting, and even more importantly, the need to address it. And I believe that's where the educators as well as the operators are coming in, because that, long story short, from an operator's perspective, it's because it generates revenue, creates shareholder value. It's about doing the right thing. We're all about sustainability of the regulated sports betting markets. And at the very heart of that sustainability are the issues that we have, or the criteria that we have already touched upon. Integrity of the game, well-being of the athletes, because it's needless to say that without the games and the integrity of the games being preserved and protected, we would have nothing to offer. That's even the cynical commercial business approach applies here. So, as I've said, the bottom line is that we do need to work very closely together across the whole ecosystem to keep preserving the integrity of the individual games or sports and the well-being of the athletes that ultimately feed into the products, sustainable products, that the gambling industry or sports betting industry in this case offers to its patrons.
Gotcha. Ryan, you'll have a unique perspective on this as a former pro baseball player. Why don't you tell us about the risks involved here?
I think what Epic is trying to do, is we're trying to emphasize when we go in and we're having these conversations and these lived experience conversations, is to help people understand that this goes beyond the athlete. This is now an environmental thing, the environment of which these athletes, whether it is through their NCAA member institution or professionally, it's changing. When we're going to talk to student athletes in states where there is legalized sports betting now, and now they're interacting with individuals maybe sitting next to them in class that have placed a bet on their game and things like that, or now we're sometimes it's readily available as a professional athlete and they're traveling, that we want to increase that awareness across all spectrum. So it's not only the athlete recognizing that there's something within themselves that make them more vulnerable, but now there's supporting staff and things that are around them that are aware of different risk factors as well. So maybe if they're able to see something within an athlete or something in maybe that support system that's around the athlete, now that can bet legally, they can step in and help that person and maybe recognize something is going on, even when that athlete isn't able to recognize it within themselves. Because as I've mentioned before, there were multiple times, and even when I got to a point where I wanted to seek help, I didn't recognize what was going on within myself. I was incapable of taking those blinders off. And so, being able to help more people across all industries identify where there may be potential risks, I think not only helps the athlete in general, but just provides a safer environment for all to enjoy sports betting and gambling as a whole.
Right on. This next question takes me back to, maybe 6th grade, sitting in a classroom, thinking about what gets through to me and what doesn't. So based on past experience, how has lived experience of gambling addiction incorporated into prevention education impacted audience reception as opposed to, say, a traditional presentation that's just kind of chock-a-block with data? Which works better? How do each work? Why don't you guys fire away, Mark?
At least from our perspective, engaging with Ryan and his team and all the other presenters from Epic, and just watching them and watching the audience engage, their attention, at least to me, it's clearly impactful. I think some of the data that we're gaining, Ryan, and the work you guys are doing is demonstrating that impactfulness. So I think it hits home. It's real. These are real people. I think it is important for all of us in our role to make sure people understand the rules and all the boring data and all that stuff we do present them with. So I think the complement of the lived experience work just really, I can't say any better. Like it really hits home, and I think it's just impactful. So
Sure, Martin.
Oh, yet again, I'll be running a risk of stealing Ryan's thunder and potentially being hit by his baseball bat. But what I would say, and I've had the privilege and pleasure of having worked with Ryan and his colleagues for some time. First point, I strongly believe that it takes a lot of courage to go and share your innermost story with other folks. Got to stand up there and you're talking about your own life. That's what Ryan's been doing, the likes of Dan Trollaro, Mark Potter, Pat Chester, that you've alluded to. Second point, it's really, especially Pat's story, and not sure whether I can share that, but I suppose I will, because he's been doing it publicly. Now, it's really given me a different perspective on things. For all my sins, I still, despite all the madness and lunacy of late, and I will always be a Patriots fan. Well, one of the greatest memories is having beaten the Seahawks some time ago by now. And Pat very kindly shared with me that he was at the game and he had a lot of money on that game, even some of his family's money. So whereas I was, and I still lived in London, UK at that point, jumping up and down like a lunatic when Malcolm Butler made that famous interception, I can't even start imagining how Pat must have felt at that point, having lost all that money being at the game. So that's what I mean, just one example, when I say that it's given me, and I'm sure because the programs that Epic have deployed have been incredibly impactful, it's given lots of folks out there a completely different perspective. And really, the final point, and again, Ryan's much closer to it than I am, but it's also helped the students, the staff, the professional athletes in the room, those who may not even be certain what may be happening, whether it amounts to gambling addiction. It's also helped them to pluck up that courage and go and grab Ryan, grab Mark Potter, and Trollaro, all these other guys, and say, look, I may be having a problem here, just can you take a minute, step aside, and could we talk about that? So that, in my view, is the biggest contribution a lived experience program generates, and it's still badly needed.
Before I let Ryan go, I'm from Seattle as well, Martin, and I thought I felt bad about that Seahawks loss until I got Pat's story. So that resonated with me.
All about perspective.
Yeah, perspective. Yeah. All right, Ryan, you're up.
You mentioned something about 6th grade, and it brought me back to the DARE program, right? This is your brain on drugs with the skillet and the eggs and all of that stuff. And we used to get scared by certain things, right, in the United States, and almost kind of the scared you straight. And I think the lived experience perspective comes at it of, what, we're all human beings and we make mistakes. There are mistakes to be made, and what, if we want to help you to make sure to identify before those mistakes become detrimental. And I think one of the best things that I love to do in talking with the student athletes, and I always end it with this, is, you know, we hope that we've educated those student athletes and athletes in general about what those risk factors are. And maybe you're identifying one of those things inside of yourself or one of your teammates, or maybe it's a family member or a friend that is around you that you've looked at this presentation, or you've heard my story or one of my wonderful colleagues' story and go, you know what, I see a little bit of somebody in that, right? And we hope that, and we leave them with, you know, it takes 30 seconds out of your day to walk up to somebody and say, you know what, I don't know what you're going through, but you're acting kind of weird. If you ever want to have a conversation, I'm here. And if I could get one person in the audience, either with the NCAA, you know, audience, or with the pro sport audience, to walk up to somebody, because, you know, for you as the person walking up and saying something, it doesn't really mean much, but for someone who's really going through something, who may be believing that nobody understands, you know, to have someone take 30 seconds out of their day to say, I don't know what's going on, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. You know, it means the world to a person like myself, who was walking down that road, who believes that they're all alone, you know, who nobody understands, you know, what's happening. And so, again, coming at it from that lived experience point of view, is I hope that as my colleagues and myself and, you know, other people, as this is brought to the forefront, maybe they can step up and have the wherewithal that, you know what, we're not trying to scare you straight, but we're trying to tell you that everybody makes mistakes and we all slip up from time to time. But before it becomes detrimental for yourself and for the people that are around you, please go seek help, because it is okay. And if you see something in someone, walk up and take that 30 seconds out of your day to say, hey, I'm here if you ever want to have that conversation.
Yep, it is okay, Ryan. And you hit on a really good point. We're fortunate to live in a time where it is okay to talk about whether you're struggling with your mental health. I don't think that was even the case 10 years ago. And that gets me into my next question. How has gambling changed as a player welfare issue, as a mental health issue, since the repeal of PASPA? Mark, if you want to start there.
Yeah, and Ryan may be best positioned to talk about this, but at least from, you know, from our perspective, the ease by which people can engage in betting, and then coupled with the normalization that comes through marketing and advertisement, it just seems like it has really changed. You talk about 10 years, like literally over the last several years, it's just become more and more. I have young children, a middle schooler and an early high school age kid, and it's just really fascinating to see life through their eyes, and the amount of again, marketing or advertisement that makes its way to them. And so I think, you know, the ripple effect of that is just, you know, there's more issues that come along, and it underscores the need, as Martin said earlier, for this multifaceted way to educate and bring awareness.
Gotcha. Martin.
It's clearly a matter of increased exposure and exposure levels. Of course, as I've said, and I'll very much stand by it, having regulated markets, having regulation in place is an upside, because it does allow us, and by us, I don't mean just the gambling industry, but everybody involved in the ecosystem. It does help us detect the nefarious issues, including the likes of the scandals related to Shohei Ohtani, and I'm sure everybody has seen what the NBA, for a good reason, in my book, has done about John Tay Parker. I'm sure we might come on to talk about that. So having regulation that allows us to detect these occurrences and address them is a good thing. Of course, at the same time, going back to my point about the sustainability of the market, it's all work in progress. So as an industry, and again, beyond, we need to continue stepping up our education efforts. Lately, quite a few new RG organizations have cropped up, and that is a good thing, as long as everybody within that ecosystem continues working together. So in other words, I don't think that there would be a silver bullet or a panacea right now. As I've said, very much work in progress, but there are certain steps that can be taken to grab betting related advertising as an example. Again, this is my personal view that I'm not trying to foist on anybody, but in my book, rather, the two critical components or issues to address are: one, the volume, which actually may sort itself out as the markets mature, because typically the volume, the frequency of adverts goes up on every new market entry, and it would appear that this year there may not be any additional states to regulate sports betting. So that's one of the factors that will ultimately determine the volume of advertising. Plus, I suppose the broadcasters who provide the platforms for advertising, especially the TV networks, they may be coming under some pressure from their audiences. So that may be another rather practical way of regulating the volume. And secondly, it's also about the messages that are being conveyed. Now, there's no such thing, let's be honest, as a risk-free bet. Bet is inherently associated with an element of risk. But there may be free bets. But if, as an operator, I'm offering a free bet, it better be a free bet. It better be what it says on the tin. We need to put our patrons in a position to be able to discern what it means. So in terms of exposure, that's the point I'm trying to bring across. Now, this is how I'd go about it. Keep educating folks out there, keep working together, have a think about how the likes of our advertising could be even more user-friendly and bring on board the concerns that we've discussed on this webinar and, of course, outside of it.
Thanks, Martin. Ryan, if you want to comment a bit about the impact on mental health.
Yeah, it's twofold when we're talking to these athletes, right? There's now more so than ever in all landscapes of athletes building brands online and through social media and the increase of exposure there, right? And as there's more and more markets that are becoming legalized, and these athletes are trying to better themselves and try to get themselves more market, they're opening themselves up as well to whatever social media is happening out there. And so again, being able, as everyone has pinpointed, it's the environment of which now these athletes are operating in with the increased exposure in social media, and not necessarily, themselves sports betting, but they may have friends and family members or things like that that can do these things legally, where they're now maybe these conversations when it wasn't legal, they're not having them at the dinner table or the lunch table, as Mark eloquently put it, watching the exposure now. These conversations are there. I'm having conversations with my 9-year-old son to where he will go, Dad, is that a bet? Is this considered a bet? Or, can I do that? And I think they're wonderful conversations to have to get them to understand what it is. But, as people are trying to navigate this slippery slope right now, and they're seeing things happening online to where people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars pretty easily, there has to be that education in that forefront, which everyone here is a three-pronged approach to do, to make sure that everyone understands what those inherent risk factors ultimately are as well. And if you, again, start to see yourself interact in a negative way with something that should be interacted with in a positive way, and can be, absolutely, if you're not an NCAA student athlete, Mark, then we don't need to be afraid to have that conversation, much as we do with other things now in the forefront if we're interacting with them in a negative way as well.
Thank you. Martin touched on kind of the elephants in the room, the virtual room here, the Shohei Ohtani situation and the Jonte Porter situation. With the Ohtani situation, we're talking about the exploitation of the illegal market, given that he and his interpreter were in California. With the Porter situation, we're talking about the exploitation of the legal market. I'm wondering if these situations are signs that the legal regulated market is working, And, that can be true, but this can also be true. And what can the industry do to really, stamp home to the public that the market is working, and what more can be done? Mark, if you want to start there.
Yeah, it's Mike, I think there's a complicated answer to that. I think, betting is as old as time, I guess. It's been around for a while, and we certainly have had scandals before there was legalized sports betting. So I don't think legalized sports betting is certainly the problem, right? Like that's been here. The regulated market is working in that it allows us, and Martin talked about this earlier, it allows us the visibility and the detection to understand these things. Is it easier to maybe have some scandals? Maybe, in the sense that there's a lot more exposure. There's probably more people involved in betting day to day. The betting industry has evolved and changed. And I don't know anything about the Porter incident, but if, the ability to bet on oneself, the prop bets, all that's evolving and changing as data changes, right? So, yeah, I don't think it's made it worse. I think the regulated market is working. Can it be better? I'm sure it can. I'm sure it will be. I mean, I think it's pretty juvenile here in the U.S. and I think whether it's the integrity services, the operators, the leagues, and the NCAA, I think we're all trying to find our way here, and we're getting better and better at it. And so I think we'll continue to improve. But at the same time, and it can't be ignored, is like that unregulated market is a problem. And it hasn't gone anywhere. I mean, there's still an element of that, right? And so there needs to be a focus on that as well. Whether it's improving the regulated market versus improving efforts around the unregulated market, those aren't mutually exclusive. Those things can happen at the same time. And I think it's, really important for all of us, and not just those of us on this call, but whether it's, state governments, federal authorities, our regulatory groups, to really tackle both of those issues at the same time. Again, kind of complicated answer, but I think there's room to improve in both areas.
Complicated
Martin,
answer,
Ryan?
but also
Yeah.
super thoughtful and wonderful. And I'm not sure Martin can top it, but I'm going to give him a chance right now.
I stand no chance. No, that's not happening. What I was going to say, a few points. So if this was a court or a regulatory hearing, I'd have to state my conflict of interest first, of course. So I'm biased. I've been in this industry for 15 years. So I'm not going to say that it's not working. But all jokes aside, I do believe that it is working, and that's for a variety of reasons that we've, to a large extent, already alluded to. So to sum that up, it's always preferable to create a regulated, controllable ecosystem and offer, it's not any product, but especially those products that may lead to addiction, such as sports betting, on gambling, looking at it even more widely. But that's why regulation is so important in terms of what else could be done. Now, Mark's alluded to all the data that the industry and others collect that could be put to an even more efficient use. We keep improving and perfecting our responsible gambling and sports integrity tools. I suppose another point, and Mike will be pleased to hear that, I've always gotten fair hearing from Sports Handle. Lately, I've got a very fair hearing from ESPN, who did a piece on the Shohei Ohtani issue, and it was balanced. Unfortunately, there's still some media out there, the Times may not call me ever again, who, and I will also use it as a segue to talk about the black market in a second, who may have a certain kind of agenda and keep portraying all these scandals as a function of the regulated market. And that's simply not the case. The systems may not be perfect, or perhaps may not be perfect just yet, but they are, as Mark pointed out as well, they are here to detect, and they have proven themselves successful to detect these issues. Do we need to be even more efficient in terms of preventing these issues from happening? Well, yes. At the same time, there's a strong human factor. John Tay Parker and the NBA sent out a very strong signal there, or Shohei's interpreter. These guys, they've been batting, and they stand right next, or they're even part of the league or sports ecosystem, so they inevitably have inside information they can use. But let me just say, before I very briefly move on to the black market, now somebody like John Tay Parker, that's why he's been banned from the NBA forever, that is the cardinal sin. Betting on your own sport, let alone betting against your own team. Where's your sense of integrity, chivalry, sportsmanship? Jesus Christ. And finally, yeah, absolutely, the huge difference between these two cases is the fact that, from what we've gathered, Shohei's interpreter Beth, an illegal operator. And in my book, and that's the final point, it really comes down to giving both the state and, if need be, federal agencies the powers to enforce the laws that are already in place to clamp down on this behavior. So the regulation, that's the foundation. It needs to be efficient. It needs to incentivize the legitimate operators to come in. But as a reward, and that's the only reward I'd be seeking and asking for, that's for the state and potentially federal authorities to guarantee those operators that played by the book, that they will go and take efficient and even harsh enforcement action against those operators that are just, excuse my crude language, they're taking the piss. They're not playing it by the book. They're taking advantage of both the legalized industry and its patrons.
Thanks, Martin. Ryan, what's your take here?
I'm coming at it from a more, humanistic point of view. Obviously, I hope I continue to bang the drum of education, right? I think you continue to educate, and you find new ways to continue to educate. Again, I think this needs to be pulled to the forefront. I know it's an ever-changing market, and for me, looking at it, I hope that there is well-being and support for the individual, because they're going to live a life outside of basketball. I live a life outside of sport. We all live a life, outside, and maybe identifying, what were those factors that ultimately led to what happened, right? Allegedly and all of that until it comes out. But, it's how can we help that individual? Is it more education? Is it identifying maybe a deeper issue that is, going on, and ultimately help that person? Because I think, in leagues are doing a wonderful job, and I was blessed to be able to go around to some, to some leagues, and they have wonderful support systems set in place to help those athletes that may be more at risk, but continuing to educate those athletes to saying, hey, you have support and help here. Please use it. It is there for you, so that things like this do not happen. If you ever feel the urge to do this, we can be here and to support and help that individual.
Thanks, Ryan. Before I get to my next question, Jerry Finn has weighed in the Q&A section with a better one than I could ever ask. I'm going to read it to you guys. Here in Ireland and the UK, you can open an online betting account at 18. Why don't online gambling companies have an onboarding course for 18 to 25-year-olds when you open an account? Like a test you do before you learn to drive. Make it mandatory for that age group. Ryan, I want to start with you. What do you think of that idea?
I'll be honest, I've never even thought about that before. It's definitely something to explore. I think now in the day and age, again, of social media and seeing it out there, and you have, influencers and things like that. I think that's something that could be, a wonderful solution. How do you mandate it? Again, it's hard in the United States with how fractured, state by state laws and things like that. And does that require, national legislation? That's not my topic of expertise. I can't get into politics and do all of that. But, I think, again, I'm banging the education drum. I think it's wonderful. So anytime that we have a chance to continue to educate those young populations that are dipping in their toe and starting to understand what their relationship is with gambling, I think being able to continue to educate them in a different manner that may reach them, because I don't think one way of educating is the 100% correct way that's going to reach the mass amount of populations or everybody. So if we can continue to educate the most vulnerable populations in a way that they can understand it, I'm all for it.
Mark, you're the person most intimately involved with this age group that Jerry's talking about. What would you think of that sort of concept?
Yeah, without having thought through it, and like Ryan, I'd not heard of that. It seems like a good idea. Anything that we can do to bring awareness before people get into it probably is a good thing. So without having thought more about it, it sounds good. Martin's the one here with international exposure and experience, and from an operator standpoint. So I would appreciate hearing from him on this topic. But yeah, sounds good.
Martin, let's get that operator standpoint. I imagine this is a little bit of friction it would create with signing people up for betting accounts. But what do you think?
Thanks for your faith in me, Mark, as usual. Kicking it over to me. I'm gonna catch that punt. Well, yeah, a couple of points perhaps from the practical perspective to address Ryan's point about mandating it. I think in the past, especially the state of New Jersey, a few others have proven themselves to be trailblazers. The industry is not very keen for, I suppose, obvious reasons on federal legislation, but what it may take would be for one regulator, excuse me, to pick up the idea, run with it, and then get support from the other regulators, and that way it may send a wave up and down the country. So that could be a way of addressing the patchwork of existing legislation that you've alluded to. The questions also reference the UK. So in the UK, it's currently been trialed whether individualized or group by group, category by category approach could be applied to individual groups, especially those that are more vulnerable. So of course, maybe an un-American thing to say, if you will, but that piece of learning and experience could then be at least presented for consideration in the United States. And to your point, Mike, about the potential friction or the customer friction to the customer journey, I'm a big proponent of doing whatever it takes to create a sustainable market. And the key cornerstone is to protect the patrons. So I think it's a good idea to have it as part of the onboarding journey for those who need it in one way or another. I would suggest that playing a 1-2 minute long video, it wouldn't kill anybody to watch that. So it may be music of the future where it's warranted.
Thanks, guys. Sarah Beth from the great state of Wyoming gets big kudos for actually asking a question I was going to ask myself. So let's do that one. With some athletes ascending directly to the pro ranks from high school, be it to Major League Baseball, to the G League, do you think it's now appropriate to educate high school student athletes on the ins and outs of gambling and its potential harms? I want to start with Ryan there.
Absolutely. I can't speak, directly. I know I have colleagues, over in the UK and in Europe, and they're doing programs even as young as primary school age. And I think that, again, bringing those conversations to the forefront, because as I was alluded to earlier, it's not going anywhere. It's just ever expanding. And so, being able to have open and honest conversations at a younger age to get people to understand the the world that they're entering in, I think is never a bad thing, right? I mean, again, I go back to my young days. We used to have dare, in third and fourth grade about, this is your brain on drugs, and we're having those conversations about other things at an extremely early age. And I think gambling and other things like that could and should be brought up, and understand that, there are healthy ways to enjoy things, and being able to help identify again where things may be going awry. And I think if you normalize those conversations and normalizing having those conversations, then you're going to normalize people coming to help when things start to go wrong as well. So I think it's a great idea to have those conversations at a young age.
Gotcha. Mark, these people are coming directly to the NC2A from high school. What do you think of that notion?
Absolutely. Absolutely needed. There's no
Gotcha.
no question. And it's anecdotal, but when we're dealing with student athletes who have been involved in some sports gambling issue, they almost exclusively say, I began gambling before I came to the NCAA, before I became a college athlete. So to me, it's the most glaring issue that we're facing, is that, again, whether it's my children in middle school and high school, or the normalization of sports betting, is like, we have to address it there. We can't wait till they become student athletes and professional athletes. I don't want to say it's too late. We wouldn't not want to intervene then, but there has to be a strategy for younger people.
Martin, do you want to chime in here?
Yes. In all honesty, there's not that much to add, because I totally concur with what Ryan and Mark have said. I suppose from what I've heard and in my own experience, deploying or rolling out that education at the high school level has proven to be rather controversial in the past, because some parents, for want of better expression, kicked up a fuss. Oh, why would you want to talk to my boy about gambling? So I suppose the potential fix, and I'm really thinking out loud, would be to have those kids, for want of better expression, and their parents or the loved ones in the room. Because I suppose what I'm gonna say tends to get neglected, that's not true, but what tends to get underestimated is the fact that those who, well, the school, that's what I'm trying to say, the school and the parents need to be working together, in my book, on all these issues. So is it the case we may be making a wrong assumption by assuming that the parents, the loved ones, the other mentors and educators already know what betting is about and about its vagaries? That's why I would suggest that we bring everybody together and do the education, at that level, this way. Because as I've said, I agree with Ryan and Mark that it's still needed and warranted at NC2A level, and then of course beyond, but for some it may be little too late.
Gotcha. This leads into my next question. I'd like to know, and again, I'll start with Ryan here since he works with different populations. What are some of the differences in educating amateur athletes and professional athletes about the dangers of gambling? What sort of messaging, what are the nuances in messaging there that you try to convey to those different populations? Ryan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, different professional sports leagues have their own rules on what you can and cannot do, which is a little bit different than what the NC2A says you can. So when we're talking with those professional athletes, obviously we're conveying those rules of what that organization says you can't do, but the ways that you can enjoy it, legally, we talk about identifying what your relationship with it looks like, much as you would with alcohol or anything else, right? Are we having a healthy relationship? And truthfully, identifying that, there is a very large subset of population that can enjoy gambling for fun. I just happen to be a part of the population that cannot. I understand that now, and I'm fine. But if you yourself as a professional athlete happen to, again, find yourself in one of these things, or if it's taking over areas of your life that you're not comfortable with, then we need to, again, have a self-realization and step up and have that conversation. When we're talking to the NC2A athletes, obviously, I think it's a wonderful message, and there's a reason why it stood the test of time and it works on is the don't bet on it, right? I mean, it's the truthful thing, that, these NC2A athletes stand to lose a lot. We talk to them that a lot of these student athletes have worked their entire life to be able to sit into a position and enjoy athletics as a student, right? It's something that they have looked forward to probably since they were a kid. That's why they're sitting in these auditoriums or in these spaces that we're having these conversations with. And it's just not worth ruining what you have worked your entire life to get to, no matter what level you're playing at. If you're an NCAA student athlete, I don't care if you're Division III to Division I, it is an honor and a privilege to be able to sit there and call yourself a student athlete. And so here's what the NCAA says you can and cannot do. Here are the rules and the consequences that you will face, as they're ever changing. And if you do recognize something, within yourself, don't be scared to go get help. Go find that help. There are, people there and put there to be able to help you if you see yourself at risk, or if the environment around you is becoming detrimental, a la friends pressure, familial pressure, social media, classmates, things like that. Let's step up and have conversations with the support systems that are set in place to be able to then help you get yourself and navigate yourself out of a potential hurtful situation so you can go enjoy that career as a student athlete for however long you're on campus.
Gotcha. In the interest of time, guys, I'm going to skip ahead to kind of a big picture final question. And that is, what does the future of gambling education look like within the sporting environment across all leagues? I'm going to start with Mark. Where do you see things going in this field?
Well, for us, I said before, I'll be brief. 500,000 student athletes, probably another 250,000 or so adults that fall under our umbrella. We have to have varying degrees of messages, different types of messages. We have to be attuned to generational differences. So, Ryan mentioned don't bet on it. We have a new campaign called Draw the Line. So we're going to continuously provide updated resources that come in different forms or fashions. And so I think continuing to meet the demand and the need to a very evolving population of NCAA athletes, we need to have lived experience. We need to have things for parents. We need to have resources for the adults, our officials. We haven't even talked about the basketball, football, officials. So I think evolving resources is going to be really, really important as we continue this journey.
Thanks, Mark. Martin.
Well, clearly, the more, the better. But I would add to what Mark has already said. I will use an example of a business that Entain part owns, but MGM, you may have, if not, I believe it's a great advert. They've recently produced a dedicated responsible gambling advert starring Conor McDavid. So what I'm really trying to say is that we also need more folks like Ryan and other ambassadors, folks at the top of their sport who have bought into promoting the responsible gambling cause and use that for information and education purposes. Because no matter how hard we will try as an industry, and believe you me, we will continue trying really hard, if on top of the industry's messages, you also get to hear it from somebody you may be looking up to, I think that will reverberate even more strongly. So that, I believe, also very much forms part of the future of the education and the wider communication, even strategy around legalized sports betting and responsible gambling practices.
Yeah, I do think Canada is ahead of the curve in a good way, and making sure that if you're going to have athletes featured in these ads, that it's for responsible gambling. Because responsible gambling not only promotes responsible gambling, it's also good advertising for betting apps. Ryan, your thoughts before we break up this party?
Absolutely. I think we need to continue to normalize these conversations, you know, because sometimes they're going to be very hard conversations to have, especially if somebody is diverting off a path to where it's not beneficial for them anymore. And I think at one of the hearts of maybe lived experiences, again, is my colleagues and myself standing up there trying to normalize that conversation of, I went off of the beaten path and I can't enjoy it responsibly, or having conversations with operators, and that's okay. I made that mistake, but I'm here to tell you that, like, we need to be able to sit down and have hard conversations, that if things are going detrimental, we can stop it and make things right again, and we can help it. So I think the future of education is, again, in all aspects, whether it's familial or with friends or with RG messaging or lived experience, the whole thing is just keep having those conversations, so it's no longer kind of this nasty monster in the closet, so to speak, and it's something that we can all, you know, have conversations. Hey, we do all agree it's a good thing, but getting out and open with it and continuing to have conversations so it's at the forefront, like you said, I think is the future.
All righty then. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a lively and great discussion. And I want to thank everyone for attending. We need to keep having these talks, and I'm sure, thanks to Epic and Entain and the NC2A and Sports Handle, that we will. Everyone have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Mike Martin, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Speak soon.